Hello and welcome to episode 30 of Reflecting the Way Radio. I'm your host, Evan. Let's get started. I guess first off, for those of you tuning in, it has been a while since we've had a new episode, but if you're listening to this, you've obviously figured out that we have switched platforms, and all of our new episodes will now be on YouTube rather than Blog Talk Radio. There is a myriad of reasons for that, but none of them are terribly interesting, so I will leave them alone for now. So I suppose you could look at this as the start of Season 3 of Reflecting the Way Radio. Either way, this is episode 30. If you haven't heard any of our previous content, feel free to go back and have a look through our back catalog. All of our episodes have been transferred over to YouTube. As of now, they are all also available on the website under audio resources, and the backlog is also still available on Blog Talk Radio if that is your preferred platform. However, new episodes will not be uploaded there. Of course, me saying that here is probably of little benefit, because if you're listening on Blog Talk, you won't be hearing this anyway. Moving on. If you haven't already done so, I would highly encourage you to go check out reflectingtheway.com. The website had been a little bit quiet for a few months, but there is quite a bit of new content up there for viewing right now. So this is the first new audio episode in a few months, and we're kind of picking up with the posts where we left off. There are more posts up there than we have audio episodes, but we'll be catching up here in the future. So the topic for today's episode is understanding your foundations. Now, naturally, the first thing you're probably going to think when I say understanding your foundations is going to be something to do with the general comprehension of some principle or doctrine or theology in the Christian life. And that's actually not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is exactly what the word breaks down to: understanding. To stand under, or to stand under and examine more specifically. Now, there is a companion article to this episode with the same name. I will include the link in the description below. Feel free to go check that out if you like. There'll probably be some more angles covered in the article than are covered here, and vice versa, so it's probably worth your time to check out both. And I will say right up front that the inspiration for this article and episode was not necessarily an original idea, but I've adapted it to fit the context I'm looking for, just because I thought the analogy was so good. So when we're talking about understanding or standing under, I think maybe the best way to portray this is with a bit of a word picture. Now, in your mind, picture a building. Either 2 stories or something with a basement, or you need two levels in this building in your mind. Now, imagine that on the second story of this building, you wanted to put something very heavy. Now, the something doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Just picture something heavy: a printing press, a concrete mixer, vehicles, something like that. Something large and heavy. Now, if you were going to put something like that into a structure, you would probably want to have the foundation and the supporting structure below the second story or the main floor or a basement. If there was any kind of void under the floor that you were putting this heavy object on, you would likely want that substructure and those foundations examined by a structural engineer. You wouldn't buy a residential home and just assume that you could put a printing press in the middle of the living room. Chances are pretty good it's coming through the floor. So you'd have somebody examine the substructure and see if the structure was up to the job of holding the weight. Now, maybe this metaphor is obvious, maybe not, but the building in this case would represent your worldview, essentially. It is not just a religious framework per se, but what I'm referring to here when I'm talking about foundations of the building being your life, essentially, the way you see the world, that substructure is everything that your entire worldview is built upon. Everything from your view on religion, to politics, to family structure, to the existence of a god, to the central generating force behind morality and ethics, that sort of thing. So, with that in mind, generally, I like to think that most people would have the foresight or wisdom, if they wanted to put a printing press in their living room, to have their house structure examined. But unfortunately, seemingly in everyday life, people will put weight onto this substructure that they have built up over their lives with not a second thought to whether the structure can support the weight. Now, what's the weight that I'm talking about here? Well, obviously I'm not talking about putting a printing press in your life. That's obviously not what I'm saying. But what I am referring to when I'm talking about putting weight on your foundations is I am referring to those heavy choices, those heavy decisions, those really tough things that life throws at you. How you deal with them, how you view them, how they impact you, how you allow them to impact others, and stuff like that. Now, often, the way life seems to pan out, most of us inherit a lot of our foundational beliefs, the basic underlying paradigm which we build everything on, tend to inherit that from parents or family or society at large, and in most cases it is a mixture of those along with other things. Unfortunately, in today's world, a lot of that is also shaped by the public school system, mainstream news, stuff like that. And lots of people will go through their entire life piling weight into this structure, making decision after decision, and never taking a step back to examine their foundations. Now, obviously, the content of this channel and all of my content is with a spiritual bent, so we'll kind of look at it that way for now, but this applies to pretty well everything. It's easy, and lots of people do it, where you will have some kind of epiphany or awakening or salvation experience or come to Jesus moment or what have you at some point in your life where maybe you've been going to church every Sunday, or even every Sunday morning, night, and Wednesday evening for 20, 25, 30 years of your life, and one day you sort of, quote-unquote, wake up and discover that, I won't say it's all a sham, but effectively what you've been doing is going through the motions. And maybe you've been taught something that isn't necessarily true. And maybe you have some ideas that maybe have merit, but they're not completely correct through and through. And so you go on kind of a quest to discover what is true. And lots of people, unfortunately, wrongfully, will think of this as examining their foundations. But in fact, it's not what they're doing. In a case like this, and believe me when I tell you, without going into all the gory details of my backstory, I did this for a number of years. After leaving a particular religious system, I spent several years auditing everything I had been taught, but it has culminated in me being able to take a step completely back and examine everything from the ground up. And, of course, lots of this happens as a process, but it is important to note that the simple process of auditing belief is not necessarily what I'm talking about here. Auditing belief in this context would be very similar to examining the drywall in the building, checking out the electrical, checking out the plumbing, making sure all of that's sorted, ensuring you don't have any rotten studs in the walls, that sort of thing. But you're not actually getting at the foundation of things. You're addressing structure, but it's the secondary structure. It's not what's really holding up the building or the home. The foundational issues that I'm talking about here are those things that are, maybe a good word is, they're taboo to talk about. They are those things that, quote unquote, well, everybody knows X. Everybody knows Y. Why would you even ask about that? It's obvious. And unfortunately, so many of those things that are so obvious that everybody knows are, in fact, something that has been drilled into your head over and over and over again until it becomes an unquestionable truth. But it's not truly unquestionable. You've just been conditioned to think it is. I don't know who said it. I can't remember who said it, but the comment has been made that if you want to know where deception lies, look at the one thing that is above reproach, or the one thing that is beyond question, and you'll find your deception. Now, I don't want to get too far into my own personal opinion here, and I don't want to insinuate something that isn't true, so please don't read between the lines here. But I do want to give you some inkling of what I'm talking about. Coming from a quote-unquote Christian background, lots of people listening to this, I'm assuming, are of the same persuasion or of the same background. Some of the things that are unquestionable, or said to be unquestionable, are things like the veracity, validity, and divinity of the Bible. You can even take that a step further, and you can talk about specific Bible translations, but that's a whole different kettle of fish. Some other things would be the historicity or nature or divinity of the individual we know as Jesus. You can't question that, because if you question that, you're not a good Christian. It's those really big, uncomfortable questions that I'm talking about taking a look at. Now, there's a verse in the New Testament, and this makes people sometimes get a little bit defensive, but that's okay. Paul says to prove all things. And often when I've heard that verse used, it is in the context of prove everything with the Bible. Now, there is something to be said for that, granted. However, have you proven your Bible? And here's where this gets dicey, because the tendency is, and I'll just run with this example for now. Like I said, don't read into this, but I'm just going to work with this example. The tendency is, if you examine your Bible in terms of its veracity, validity, authenticity, divinity, you name it, the tendency is to come at it from the perspective of, I have this set of beliefs, therefore this book must be immutably true in all of its aspects, or the rest of what I believe can't be true. So the way generally you set out to investigate the veracity of the Bible isn't so much to objectively question whether or not the book deserves the respect and veneration that it's given, so much as it is to go out and try and prove your position correct. You're working from a point of assumption and trying to prove your assumption right, rather than start from a place of, I don't want to say indifference, but maybe impartiality. And I know it's almost impossible because we all have biases and they're hard to work past, but how many of us have taken the time and put in the blood, sweat, tears, and effort to go and literally look at one of these foundational things from an outside looking in perspective to see if what we think is there is really there. Now, I'm not insinuating one way or another what you're going to find when you look into this, but what I am saying is if you haven't gone and done the homework, you are piling life's heavy weights of decision and, what forms your paradigm, how you view the world, your expectation for the way things work, your perception of the supernatural, your perception of the afterlife and God, you're shaping all of that and putting all of this weight onto, and in this example, onto a book before you have objectively examined whether or not that book is completely accurate and true from cover to cover in every single detail. You assume it is because you were brought up to believe it is, but there's a difference between belief and knowing, or belief and proving. And Paul said in the book itself, prove all things. Now, does the veracity, validity, and divinity of the Bible fall under all? I would argue that in fact it does. So that is something that needs to be proven. Not believed, but proven. You're also told that you should be able to give every man an answer to anything he's going to ask. So if somebody's going to challenge your view on a book, you better have a defense for your position, and not necessarily one that is strictly colored by people that agree with you. What I mean by that is you're never going to get a full spectrum picture of any given topic unless you are willing to go read, listen to, and watch things that are diametrically opposed to what you believe to be true. Now, if you can examine a topic like this from, I don't want to say your enemy's perspective, but from the opposite perspective from which you come, if you can examine a topic like the veracity of the Bible from one perspective, meaning you have grown up being taught that it is the immutable divine word directly from God to man, and so on and so forth. We've likely all been exposed to this to some degree, greater or lesser, at some point if you come from a Christian background. You've examined the book that way your entire life. Now, to step back and go, can I disprove this? In many cases, Christians, churches, pastors, what have you, will say that that is not only anti-Christian, but it's dangerous, foolish, spiritually irresponsible, take your pick. But if we're told to prove all things and give any man an answer, I would say that not only is that responsible, it is required. So if you can examine, just sticking with the example, examine the Bible from the point of view that it is nothing more than a literary work, and it is not divine, and it has contradictions in it, and it was written as a tool of political control, and so on, and so on, and so on. If you can examine the book from that perspective and make a compelling argument for it, assuming you've given this an honest effort, if you can make a compelling argument for that, that may not necessarily disprove your position that you're coming from initially, that the book is immutable, divine, there are no contradictions, and it's the Word of God. That may not disprove that, but it should tell you something. If you can make a compelling argument the other way, it should tell you something. Now, if you make an honest effort and you can't make a compelling argument the other way, that should tell you something as well. But the fact of the matter is, either way, you're going to learn something, and until you go do the work, what is to be learned there, you will not learn. And this isn't something you can pick up third hand. Or third hand, what am I saying? This isn't something you can pick up second hand. Boy, learn to talk. It's been a while. I'm rusty, can you tell? So that's just one small example. When is the last time that you went and examined something that you assumed to be a self-evident truth? Something, well, everybody knows that. Examined it objectively and tried to pick it apart. It sounds easy on the surface, but believe me when I tell you, it is one of the most difficult, intellectually stressful, spiritually demanding things you can possibly do. And unfortunately, unless you are willing to be proven wrong, to put down your preconceived ideas of what you think you know, you are not going to get the full benefits of examining things from an alternative perspective. It has been my experience and this is just my experience, that I have done more growing spiritually and intellectually by examining things that directly contradict what I think I know than by reading and listening to things that agree with what I already think to be true. So, I've said all that to say this. When is the last time, or have you ever, truly taken a step all the way back and examined your foundations, not from within the structure, but from the outside looking in, to lay down your preconceived ideas, and truly and honestly, with yourself, with those around you, with your own creator, taken a good, hard, long look at what you think you know and what you think is self-evident, and truly been willing to be proven wrong. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be proven wrong, but if you're not willing to be proven wrong, you're not going to learn what there is to learn there. So I would challenge you to pick an aspect, specifically of your faith, but this can be applied pretty well any aspect of your life, your politics, your ethics, your morals, your philosophy, but specifically with your faith. What do you think of, your religion, your religious background, your spiritual belief? I would challenge you to just pick one aspect, try and get out of your own box, and look at that aspect objectively from multiple angles, and be honest with yourself with what you find. The results may surprise you. Sometimes the results will surprise you positively. You may find that you were correct from the get-go, but sometimes, and when I say sometimes, this can be more often than some of us would like to admit, you can completely and utterly prove yourself wrong, and it sucks. There's no two ways around it. It's just not fun. But if you're anything like me, you'd rather know, and know that you know because you did the time to go back and look and figure things out for yourself without necessarily having a ton of input from secondhand sources. To know that you know something and can prove it to somebody else, you would rather go through the intellectual, spiritual, sweating, bleeding, and crying and figure out what's actually not true and what is, and be able to defend all of that, rather than bumble through life assuming that you know something, assuming your position is defensible, but never truly having a defense for it. It's better to be in the know than in the know, if you know what I'm saying. It's better to be aware of the truth, regardless of how uncomfortable it is, rather than to go through life and assume you have the truth and never be able to prove it to yourself or anybody else. And I'll even go a step further and say, in a lot of cases, you won't be able to prove something one way or another. In which case, for yourself, you're going to either have to choose to put it to the side, whatever that topic or article is, put it to the side and simply say, I can't prove this. It may be true, it may not be true, and you will have to quarantine it either until you get more information, or it'll just have to stay on the shelf as an unprovable thing. Or you may be able to prove something to yourself, but you don't have any objective proof. And that's a problem that I run up against not infrequently. And that's an interesting case, because if you can prove something to yourself, that's great. You've proven it for yourself. And maybe that's all that's important to you. But the fact of the matter is, if you can't prove it to somebody else, you still have a bit of a problem. So with all that in mind, pick a topic this week and challenge it. Honestly challenge it, and you might be surprised at what you find out, one way or the other. And with that, I will close up this new episode of what I'll call Season 3, Episode 30 of Reflecting the Way Radio, now available on YouTube. And I would encourage you, if you haven't done so, check out reflectingtheway.com. We're also on Facebook under the same name. You can find all of our latest content on the website or get updates through Facebook as well. All of our new audio-video content will be posted on YouTube, Facebook, and our website, as well as any new written material will be on Facebook as soon as it's up, and the website as well. So I would encourage you to check those out. And with that, I will leave you. Blessings.